for our Microsoft project training. So once again, my name is Obalim, and then of course I welcome you. If you remember, in the previous lesson, I made mention of the fact that we have 5 process groups or 5 major steps that we take in project, which of course includes the project initiating, the planning, the executing, the monitoring and controlling, and then the closing. And then we've taken care of planning to a large extent. Now, we're going to be talking about the executing and the monitoring and controlling part of our scheduling. So don't forget, when we talk about executing is basically getting the work done. And then in monitoring and controlling, this is where we now report the actuals. And then as the work is being done, we are reporting the actual. Then in monitoring and controlling, this is where we now track. That's majorly what we do during the monitoring and controlling stage. So we track the project performance. And what do we do during the tracking? In the tracking, you're basically comparing what is happening in the project with what you planned to do. And that's one major thing that you do during the monitoring and controlling stage. So a very important technique that helps us to do that, to do the tracking that I just mentioned, is what we now refer to as the end value management. So what does that mean? And we're going to take a look at end value management, so you see exactly how it applies and then also how you can use it within your project. Okay, good. So when we talk about end value management, there are some very important data that we use in end value management. Those data include our planned value, which is PV, our end value, which is EV, and then our actual cost, which is AC. So when we talk about planned value basically talks about how much we have budgeted or how much we plan to spend for a given activity up until a particular period of time. That's what we refer to as the planned value. So let's say, for example, we have a project and the project is to build 4-sided fence. So that's the project that we're doing. And each side is supposed to cost us $1,000. And then it will take us 1 week to complete each side. So this is a simple project. So based on the illustration that I have given, the planned value for this project is now how much we budgeted to spend per side per week. And that's what we call the planned value. So in this case, our planned value will be 1,000. Now, when we talk about the end value, in a layman's definition, end value simply refers to how much should have been spent based on the amount of work that was done. So let me give you a scenario. So at the end of the first week, you got the following report based on this fence project. You were told that 50% of the work was done. So in essence, they did half a side. And then when you asked how much was spent, the workers tell you that they spent $700. Good. So remember, in week 1, what we planned was to do one side and spend $1,000. But then at the end of the week 1, when they are now reporting the actual, they reported that 50% was done and then that the amount that was spent is $700. If we had planned to spend $1,000 per side, and then half a side was done, it only makes sense that they should spend half the money. So that amount of money that the team should have spent in doing half the work is what we refer to as the end value. So that's why I said end value is the percentage of work that was done based on the planned value. And I use a layman's definition. I said how much we should have spent based on the amount of work or based on the percentage of work that was done. And that's exactly what the end value refers to in this case. So it therefore means that if the team has done 50%, they should spend half the money. That means our end value, EV, should be 500. And therefore, EV in this case would be 500 because this is what should have been spent. But then we're told that 700 was spent. So the 700 that was spent is what we now refer to as the actual cost. So actual cost, just like the name sounds, is how much was spent, or actually how much was spent in carrying out that activity. So this is the status of the work so far. Don't forget, in end value, if for example about 100, let's assume that in end value, if they finished that particular job, so they did all the side of the fence, that means 100% of it was done, our end value would be 1,000. Now let's assume they did more than half, so they did 150% on the first week. That's they did a whole of this and then also one side of this, all right, and then also half of another side. It therefore means that the end value for week 1 would be 1,500. And then, of course, again, let's assume they did just 80% of the work in week 1. It therefore means that end value will be 80% of this 1,000, which in this case would be 800. So I'm just trying to let you know how we calculate the end value, so you know exactly, what I am talking about. So if we now want to determine the status of this project, there are some tools that we use to determine the status, and those tools would include our cost variance, which we also refer to as the CV. Then there's also the schedule variance, which is our SV. Then we have our cost performance index, which is our CPI, and then our schedule performance index, which is SPI. So when we talk about the CV, cost variance, in order to calculate the cost variance, the formula we use in calculating the cost variance is our end value minus our actual cost. So if we take a look at the analysis I used earlier on when I was talking about the fence, if we take a look at it and we want to determine whether the team is on budget or over budget, that's what we use the cost variance in this case to calculate. So don't forget, they were supposed to do, okay, let me quickly adjust this to what was reported. So 50% was done. So don't forget, they were supposed to do one side, but they did half, and then they spent 700 as against 500 that they should have spent for half the work. So based on that, if we want to determine the status of this project for the cost variance, it will now be the end value, which is the 500, minus the actual cost, which is the 700. So at the end, we're going to get negative 200. What that simply means is that this particular project is already over budget by $200. Then we calculate the schedule variance. So schedule variance helps us to understand how our project is tracking against the schedule of the project. So the formula for the schedule variance is your end value minus planned value. So in this case, remember our end value is 500 and then our planned value is 1,000. So if we say 500 minus 1,000, that would give us negative 500. Now, what does this signify? It simply means that for this project, we have work worth about $500 yet to be done at the end of the very first week. And that's exactly what this portends. Then there's the cost performance index. So if we want to determine the rate of performance, how the rate of performance of the project based on cost, we use the CPI or the cost performance index. And the formula for the cost performance index is your end value divided by your actual cost. So which in this case would be your 500 divided by, remember our actual cost here is 700. And this will give us 0.714. So it simply means that for every $1 spent in this project, the value we are getting is about 71 cents. So in essence, we're not getting full value for money. We're only getting 71% of the value that we ought to get in this particular project. Now, we want to determine the schedule performance index. So our schedule performance index is your end value divided by your planned value. So which in this case would be 500 divided by 1,000. And this would give us 0.5. So 0.5 here simply means we're moving at half the pace. We're moving at 50% of the pace. That's exactly how we are progressing, or the speed at which we are progressing. In essence, our velocity in this project is about half the originally planned rate. So what we have done now is we have used this to interpret this data that was captured in the course of the project implementation. So this is exactly the formula that Microsoft Project uses to also determine these indices. Because why I'm saying this is when executing starts, and then you now begin to track your project, you may discover that you begin to see some of these details that I have just mentioned here, and then you should be able to understand the meaning of this information, and that's part of the reason why I'm taking time to explain it. Of course, you may not need to bother about all of these formulas, especially if you're not preparing for a certification exam, say for example the PMP. But then this is this formula that works behind within your Microsoft project, so that as you're entering those details, of course, you're not going to be doing anything about this computation. As you're entering your actuals, you're entering, how much was spent on a particular activity. Don't forget that we already have the planned value, which is the cost of that very activity. And then you enter how much was spent, and then also the duration, or how long the activity has lasted, or the percentage of work that's been done. Automatically, MS Project would apply this formula to each of those activities, the work packages, as well as the project in total, to be able to derive these values for you. So your cost variance, like I mentioned, will help you to determine if you're on budget or not. A negative cost variance simply means you are over budget. You spent more than you should. However, if the cost variance is positive, you know that this is good. That means you are under budget. You've not spent up to what you should spend. Then also, for the schedule variance, same thing, negative is bad. It therefore means that you are behind schedule. However, if you have a positive schedule variance, it means you are ahead of schedule. So this is good. Then the index, if you see any index that is less than 1, that's also bad. It means that for cost, you are not getting full value for amount spent. And then, of course, if your index is greater than 1, that is good. So in essence, all of the positives for variances are good, while all of the negatives for variances are bad. And then for the index, all the numbers greater than 1 are good, and then of course all the numbers less than 1, they are bad. So again, if you have an index, or if you have a schedule performance index of less than 1, like we have in this case 0.5, it means that you are behind schedule, or your progress rate is not up to what was planned. But then if it is greater than 1, it means you are good. That means you are ahead of schedule. Of course, don't forget, the result can also be 1. 1 simply means you're on target, or your variances can be 0. So 0 also means you're on target, so there is no variance. Now, another very interesting aspect of all of this is now what we refer to as the forecast. So what does the forecast help us to do? So the forecast basically helps us to determine, okay, if things continue this way, if project continues this way, by the time we are done, what will be the situation, or how much would we have spent? That's exactly what we do with the forecast. And the tools we use in forecasting would include our estimate at completion, EAC. Then we also have estimate to complete, ETC. And then we also have our variance at completion, which is the VAC. So the formula for the estimate at completion is our budget at completion, which is our BAC, divided by your cost performance index. So your budget at completion is basically how much you had initially budgeted for the whole project before you baselined it. That's what we refer to as your budget at completion. So don't forget, if we take a look at our four-sided fence, we said that we plan to spend 1,000 per side. So what would that means that for the 4 sides, it will translate into $4,000 in total. It therefore means that in this very project, our budget at completion, BAC, is $4,000. Then our cost performance index, don't forget we have a cost performance index here, is 0.714. So we put 0.714. So if we do the $4,000 divided by 0.714, that will translate into 5,602.24. So what does this mean? It simply means that if project continues this way, if the performance of the project continues this way, by the time we are done, this is not going to be a $4,000 project anymore, but then we would have spent about $5,602 or over $5,600 for the purpose of this project. So that's exactly the forecast that we're making, and that's what the estimate at completion helps us to forecast. Then there's now the estimate to complete. So estimate to complete measures how much we'll finish the remaining portion of work based on what has been based on the new forecast. How much would finish the remaining portion of work based on the new forecast. So the formula for the estimate to complete is your estimate at completion, EAC, minus your actual cost. That's the formula for the estimate to complete. So in this case, that will be 5,602.24 minus our actual cost. Don't forget, in this project, the actual cost is 700. That's how much that was reported. So, which is minus 700. And that will give us 4,902.24. It simply means that the amount of money we need to finish the remaining portion of work, which is the 3 weeks remaining work, is $4,902 based on the new estimate. So we now calculate the variance at completion. Variance at completion measures the difference between the new estimate you've made and the previous budget. So the formula for our variance at completion is your budget at completion minus your estimate at completion. In this case, our budget at completion was 4,000, and then our estimate at completion is 5,602.24. So if we do the maths, 4,000 minus 5,602.24, that would give us 1,602.24. So what that simply means is that for this very project, once we are done, we're going to be over budget by about $1,600 in total if things continue this way. So that's the forecast. And why is this forecast necessary? Because, I mean, if you're making your report to senior management about status of the project, many a time this is what you're going to be reporting, and these are the things you're going to be tracking with regards to your project. Again, like I mentioned, you probably might not need to pay so much attention to all of these calculations that I've just done, but I've kept it a bit simple. But of course, it will be a lot more complex than this. For example, you have multiple weeks, multiple work has been done, and then you now need to calculate all of these, either get the average or look for the cumulative. So, but whatever the case is, Microsoft Project takes care of all of these things for us, but you need to be able to understand exactly what each of these things mean, and that's part of the reason why I'm taking out time to do this. Okay, so in order to report our actuals within our project, so basically we're saying here now that work has started within our project. So right now we're going to learn how to be able to report the progress of our project using different methods. So that's what we're going to be doing at this point in time. So first, we want to be able to track our plan using what we refer to as specific dates. Now, what does that mean? It simply means that in the course of your actual, that's in the course of the implementation of your project, everything went according to plan. Of course, don't forget that when your project starts, so you already have resources that are assigned to the different activities that you have in your project. So these resources will begin to give you reports on the amount of work done. Basically, they begin to report the actuals as the project progresses. So sometimes this report can be done in Microsoft Project that they send to you, or they probably do it in an Excel, or you have a timesheet. So all of these are various reporting formats that you can actually use to gather data for your update now as a scheduler. So this is where the work really is. This is where you now need to begin to impute the actuals as the work is being done. So the first scenario is the best case scenario. And what's the best case scenario? The best case scenario is basically the fact that everything within the project goes according to plan. So in essence, there were no variants. What you planned to do was exactly what was done. And that's what we refer to as the best case scenario. So if that's the case, you update your project using what we refer to as specific date. So in order to do that, you simply navigate to the project tab, and then within the status date, you make sure you change the status date. Don't forget, we said that this project, we're starting our project on the, again, let me just quickly go back to the project information. So this is the project information here. Okay, so I click on project information. So you can see the start for the project. We put it at 19th of April. So let's assume that you do your update every Friday. Of course, as a scheduler, you need to have a specific date to do your update. You probably might not be able to be doing updates on a daily basis, so you probably do your updates once every week. So let's assume you're doing your update every Friday. And then, of course, so the first week of project has actually been done or has progressed, and then you want to update your project based on that. So the Friday of the week of 19th of April. So this is 19th of April. The Friday is 23rd of April. Okay, good. So we want to now state that we are that today's date is 28th of April, and we want to update our project. So remember, like I mentioned, everything went according to plan. So we want to update our project in that regard. So to do that, remember we are in the task tab, in the project tab, and then under the status group, you're going to see status date. So first of all, click on the status date, and let's change the status date to April 23rd, which is the date we're making this very update. So you can see it has changed to April 23rd, and then you click on this update project. So when you click on the update project, you make sure that you check update work as complete through. Then of course also check the first box here, which is set 0 to 100% complete, and we're doing this for the entire project. So once everything is okay like this, you simply click on OK. So the moment you click on OK, if you notice within my Gantt, you see a tiny blue bar in between. So let me zoom in on it a little bit so it's a lot more conspicuous. Okay, so you can see within my Gantt, so you can see the blue line that you have in between the two Gantt, which is in between the two bars. Remember, the one at the top represents the plan, while the one below is now what we refer to as the baseline. So the progress, you're seeing the progress now, that's the percentage that you're seeing in between, and that's exactly what the progress is showing. So in essence, based on the report we have given, it simply shows us that 10% of this very task has been done. Don't forget that this is the only task that falls within that period of which we are doing updating. That is on the 23rd of April. And of course, it also progresses in that line. So if you also check the cost column, you will notice that the actual cost for that particular activity would also get updated. So let's add a column here. So just click on the add new column, then this time around you choose actual cost. Okay, good. So if you notice, this is the activity in question. That's the activity that we just updated. That is the design building addition. And if you notice, it's showing 10% complete here based on the fact that we updated it. And then actual cost is now showing 1,000 as it were. So that's to show you that as you progress, Microsoft Project also calculates how much should have been spent as at that date, or as at the progress that you've reported, which is what we have been able to do in this case. So in essence, you can actually update your project using specific dates, just like we have done. So let's say we have another scenario where the project was also progressing exactly the way we planned. So we come again to the next weekend, and then our status date, we're not going to change it from 23rd to 30, which is the next date we're updating. That's the next Friday. We click on OK, and then we click on update, and we also click on OK. So again, you notice that the bar moves, and then you will also notice that the actual cost also keeps increasing. So that is one way to be able to record your progress. And like I mentioned, you use this especially when everything is going according to plan. Now, another way you can do this is you can also track, especially if you now begin to have deviations per activity. You can also track your plan based on what we refer to as percentage complete. So in order to track based on percentage complete, one way to do that is I add my percentage complete column. So again, under this add new column, you can see percentage complete is the first column here. So I add it. So it's already giving me that this activity, which have been updated, is at 21% already. Now, of course, don't forget, like I mentioned earlier on, we can manually enter the percentage complete for this very activity at any point in time. So I want to reduce the size of this column so that at least my table is a bit more conspicuous compared to what we used to have. Okay, good. So I want to enter the percentage complete now. Remember, like I mentioned, this is also another way to update your schedule. So let's say I select this activity 4, which is review and approve design, and let's assume 50% of this task has been done so far as at the date we are updating. So what we simply need to do is we enter 50%. So if you notice, the moment you enter 50%, it also shows up here that for this very activity, we have done 50% of the task. And another way you can do that is, if you take a look at your task tab, then within the schedule group, you would also notice that we have percentage complete there at the top. But then it only gives us the percentage complete in 0, 25, 50, 75, 100. So use this especially if it falls within those numbers. Or other than that, if is anything outside of that, then you can simply enter it from this very column. So in essence, say for example, assemble technical data, we notice that about 25% has been done. So I simply click on 25%. So you can see it shows up 25%. And then also the cost also shows up. And then let's also review technical data. Let's assume 33% has been done. So you can see here, there's no 33%. So here I simply type in, so in this box, I simply type in 33 and then I hit enter. So again, it shows that 33% of this activity has actually been done, and you can see my actual cost. So this is another way to be able to do your tracking, or rather to be able to report your actual using what we refer to as percentage complete. Of course, don't forget that it's always necessary that at any point in time, you make sure you change your status date to reflect the date that you're making this update. And for me also, in my own case, usually I like synchronizing my current date with my status date, because what that simply means is that the date I am entering this very report, the date I'm entering this actual is also the current date. So you may not have a situation where you're probably entering actuals in the future. So that's why I usually like to synchronize the two. So I'll change my current date now to be the same with my status date, which is of course 30th of April. Good. So I make it that way. So why this is necessary is so that Microsoft Project can do the right computation for me, and I won't have any discrepancies, especially as it pertains to date. So these are the updates we've done so far. So notice we updated using what we refer to as update project. And I said this is done if everything is going according to plan. So you just keep updating project and then you check, click on OK. But then, like I mentioned earlier on, you can also manually enter the percentage complete here if you have the percentage complete, or you can do that from the task tab under the schedule group. So another way we can do this, that is updating our plan using percentage complete, is to use our tables. Remember how we view our tables? So you go to view, and then of course within the data group, so this is the data group, you can see your tables there. So click on tables, and then this time around click on tracking. You're going to see tracking there. So you click on tracking, it brings you to the tracking page. So this is also another place you can see it already has percentage complete here. So here you can directly enter your percentage complete based on how much percentage has been done for that very activity, just like I have done in this case. So part of the reason why I particularly like this page is because I can actually do all my updates from this page. So depending on the method I want, either I want to use the percentage complete, which is exactly what I've been doing and which is also what is showing here. I can also use physical percentage complete. So if you're using the physical duration complete, this is not going to be affecting your remaining duration, just like when we were using our percentage complete. And then don't also forget that you use physical percent complete if you're tracking based on physical amount of work that has been done. Say for example, you go out to the site and notice that, okay, physically this is the amount of work that has been done. Then of course you probably get the percentage, and then you now enter the percentage or you track with it. But other than that, percentage complete typically tracks with schedule based on what we planned and then also the progress so far. Now, another very interesting part of this very view is that I can actually enter my actual activity start as well as activity finish date. This is also very, very important, especially if you're going to be tracking using actual value. Majorly, I also like to track with actual values because a couple of times it gives me better picture and true reflection of things than using the percentage complete, as it were. And that's part of the reason why I like using actual values in this case. So here you can see your actual start as well as your actual finish. So we can select an activity. Say for example, this very activity, which is excavation. So let's assume, if you notice, excavation. So I want to quickly add some columns here, so you would see what I'm trying to explain. So I add the start column. I also add the finish column. I also add the baseline start, and then I add the baseline finish. Okay, good. So remember, if you take a look at the excavation activity, you will notice that the start of this activity is on the 8th, is on the 31st of August, and finishes on the 24th of September, which is also the same thing as our baseline. Because work has not started, that's why the two items here are exactly the same. In essence, your baseline start is the same as your start, and then also your baseline finish also has the same date with finish. But let's assume in the actual implementation, work now starts. And then for some reason, instead of starting this particular work on the 31st of August, this work starts on so instead of starting this 31st of August, for some reason there was a delay. So this particular work starts on the 13th, or let's say on the 6th of August. So watch what happens to the Gantt. So I select 6th of August. So the moment I select 6th of August, if you notice, the bar on top has shifted, but the baseline here also still remains the same. And again, if we now check our baseline start, you can see our baseline start is still showing the original date, which is the 8th, which is the 31st of August. Meanwhile, our start is now showing the 6th of September, which is the actual start date that we entered for this very activity. So that's why I mentioned earlier on that the baseline is key. If you notice what I was doing this illustration about the baseline, so if you take a look at the Gantt, you will see how this happens. You can see because this activity is on the critical part, it has now affected and shifted other activities. So you can see all of them are now, away from their baselines, because these activities are dependent on this activity. So because this activity started late, automatically it has shifted everything, and then the project is now beginning to track late as it were. Then we can also enter the actual finish for this very activity, or the percentage complete so far. So let's say as at this moment, they have done 50% of the work and the work has not yet completed. So you can simply enter 50% in this case as per the status of the work. Of course, don't forget, once this activity ends, or rather this activity finishes, don't also forget that as you're doing this, you can see your actual cost is being calculated automatically. So once this activity finishes, you come back to this actual finish, and then report the actual finish for that particular activity. So again, the baseline finish when this activity was supposed to finish was on the 24th of September. But then let's assume that for some reason this activity, instead of finishing on the 24th of September, finishes on the 3rd of or finishes on the 4th of October. So we select the finish date on the 4th of October, click OK on whatever pops up. So you notice that the start date is different from the baseline. The finish date also stretches and also is different from the baseline. And that's exactly what you're seeing in this case. Also, if you check the baseline start and baseline finish, you will notice that they are now different from the start and finish of the project, of this very project activity. So part of the reason why I like tracking with this, like I explained earlier on, is if not for anything, it gives you better picture as to, okay, if your activities are on schedule, they are behind schedule, and then also you can actually report the actual start as well as actual finish of your activity. Don't also forget that sometimes your cost may not work automatically using the formula that Microsoft Project has given you. Just like we're seeing in this case, MS Project usually calculates cost based on percentage of work based on percentage complete. So in essence, if you've done 50%, MS Project will tell you that you spent half your money. Okay, but then of course we know that sometimes it doesn't necessarily work that way. So if that's the case, we can actually manually enter our actual cost depending on exactly how much our actual cost is. We can actually enter that manually using this actual cost column. So let's also take a look at this activity, and we're going to update it for, let's say, this activity. Don't forget that the baseline start for this activity was supposed to be on the 24th of September. So everything went according to plan. So this activity started on the 24th of September, and then we now want to report the actual cost for this very activity. That is how much has been spent. So if you go to the cell and type in the cost, if you notice, it will not be active. You might not be able to type in an actual cost here. So if you want to manually type in, or if you want to be able to manually type in your actual cost, you need to go to the Backstage view and set this up. So we go back to the Backstage view by clicking on File, and then again we go to Options. Now within the Options page, we open the Schedule page, and then we now go to Calculation Options for this project. So we scroll down. So this is Calculation Options for this project. So I uncheck this actual costs are always calculated by project. Okay, so once I do that, I click on OK. So what that simply means, I've taken away the power or the authority from MS Project to calculate my actual costs because I plan to be entering my actual costs manually. So let's assume that for this very activity, as at this date, we have spent $500 or Naira, which is what I'm using in this case. So you can see I'm able to type it in now, and I don't have any issues with that any longer. So I can also enter my actual finish and then also enter my percentage complete. So like I mentioned, this is a very good view or a very good portion for you to actually update or report your progress status as your project progress. So let me to return to my initial view, which is the entry view. I go to the view, and then I click in the data group, I click on table, and then I revert back to entry. All right, so this is the view that we had earlier on. This our entry view, and you can see how our project is tracking or progressing based on the reports that we have entered. So here we took a look at how to update our project actuals, and we took a look at how to be able to do that if everything is going according to plan. And we said we could do that from our project tab, and then under the status group, then you click on update project. Always remember to change your status date to reflect the date that you're reporting. And then we also said that another way we could do that is within our task tab, you can select the relevant activity and choose the percent complete, or you add a percent complete column and then of course type in the percent complete. And as you do that, MS Project will automatically be calculating cost for you. Then we also said that another way we could do that was to go to our view tab, and then within the data group, you click on tables, and then you now select tracking. So when you select tracking, it will give you all of these columns, and then of course based on that, you can now begin to enter the actual start as well as actual finish for each of your activities, as well as their percentage complete. Then you can also manually enter the actual cost if you have that amount. And remember how we were able to make it possible for us to enter the actual cost? We went back to the Backstage view, went to options, and then within the schedule page, we will now scroll down to calculation options for this project. We uncheck the actual cost part, and then with that, it made this particular column active, and we could manually enter our actual cost. So this is how to do your executing. Basically, as you're getting the report, you're now sending it to Microsoft Project, and then MS Project will now be interpreting it. And that's exactly what we're going to be taking a look at in the next lesson, where we shall now begin to talk about monitoring and controlling. How this particular lesson has been quite informative for you. So once again, I want to thank you for listening.